Everybody to this special edition of our Humanising Work series. We are live at the moment on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube, and for those people who are watching the recording or listening to the audio afterwards, we're also available on Spotify and podcast version. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about such an important topic and to have the pleasure of a fantastic guest with me, Meghan Juday. Meghan is the Executive Chairman at Ideal Industries. She serves on the Kingsbury Inc. board and she is the founder of the Lodis Forum, a fantastic collective community of women in board leadership roles with three main aims: the pursuit of governance excellence, the peer support for that community amongst that group to learn and support each other, and the research and advocacy around supporting greater board diversity. Meghan, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Alex, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, and we're going to get stuck straight in. I want to firstly, obviously, thank you so much for joining me. We're going to have a really good conversation and we're going to open up some questions and comments as well. On all channels, you should be able to leave some comments and questions. Please go ahead and join us throughout the conversation. We will come to as many of those as we can. We're going to be talking about human leadership. We're going to be talking about the experiences of senior women in leadership roles and how that can help inform future leadership development interventions in all types of organisations and all industries. So a great opportunity for us to learn from a rare group and community. We are going to be sharing some recommendations, and my first call to action for everybody listening is to look for the QR code, which I believe one of my team is going to be sharing shortly on the screen. Hopefully there'll also be a link in the comments. This gives you a link to a form to download the white paper that this research is based on, with all the recommendations and takeaways for you. So please go straight to that form whilst I'm speaking, download your report so that you have access to all the insights and information that we gathered through this research approach. So we're going to be talking about some of those recommendations and the insights that came from a wonderful opportunity that I had with Meghan and the community of the Lodis Forum, of which I'm very honoured to be a member. I'm also obviously a rookie member, only just setting up my own family and advisory boards. But being able to learn from that group for the past 2 years and in a fantastic expert series of information that really helps learn and share about creating greater board diversity and learning together around governance is so valuable and so rare. And we got together in Chicago at the annual symposium that Meghan organised to really share more broadly about some trending topics, some really important priorities. And we had the opportunity to discuss some of the work that I've been doing with my team on human leadership and explore their experiences of human leadership and really uncover some of the hidden ways in which they're role models for a fantastic human leadership aspects in all of their roles and their current roles too. We covered 4 key areas, and we're going to delve into these together today, Meghan, aren't we? So we started talking initially about authenticity. So we talked about what authenticity meant to women in senior leadership roles. And we dug down quite deep, really, and we came up with some really interesting themes from the discussion. And I'm going to start us off by just talking about one of those and opening it up with you, Meghan, because I was with you, obviously, talking on your table at the time we covered this topic. And the first theme that came through was around how the women in how they felt they were judged. And one of the first insights that came out was that everyone was quite confident in saying that actually those stereotypes were not their issue, and that they were able to completely not internalize those, and it was all about the person that was talking. And I found that was just fascinating, that there was a commonality amongst the group immediately. Did you hear that?
I think so. And what's fascinating, the Lodis Forum is comprised of women who are in senior leadership roles. And so we weren't talking to women early career for whom this may be a completely different experience. But I think there's this question of authenticity and the fact that if you are not truly authentic to who you are actually ineffectual, right? You're not bringing your best self. You're, questioning everything you say before you say it, rehearsing. And that's not the value that you're bringing. So I do think that I think that it's actually a learned trait of how to be authentic. And I think this is a human experience of how do you bring your whole self appropriately to the workplace, to the boardroom. But without that authenticity, there's no vulnerability. And then I think you're not getting those, truly authentic and deep conversations that, embrace that diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of different topics in there, vulnerability and authenticity and stereotypes. And I think the kind of next stage part that really struck me was exactly that, was that if people aren't able to be authentic, there's tons of research out there now, isn't there, that shares that actually authenticity is fundamental to performance, right? It really affects our performance. And if we've actually got a whole subsection of senior leaders who are unable to perform at their best because they're not able to demonstrate themselves authentically, we've got a huge opportunity to release a whole ton of impact in organizations if we can unlock how to do that better. And the fascinating part that I actually I had recognized in myself too, but I'd never really verbalized it in a group before. And I find that happens a lot with the Lodis Forum, is these kind of moments of like, oh gosh, I really thought that was just me. So was the fact that several of the people I spoke to shared that when they were rising into leadership roles through the organizations that they were working in, they had waited until they'd reached a specific level of competency before they felt able to demonstrate themselves authentically. And a lot of times they were talking about that in terms of their physical appearance, which is so important in this world. We know it, it's a huge impact with the increased kind of social media presence that everybody has now versus kind of 20, 30 years ago. And, that real understanding that people are viewing and judging you on being a little bit more curious about how you look. But the fascinating part that actually people felt like they were able to demonstrate themselves more authentically in the way they wore their clothes, the colors, the jewelry, the pizzazz, really only when they reached a level of competence that they felt comfortable to do that. I mean, that's I've never heard people talk about that in that way before. Did that ring true with you?
I think so. I think there's this question of, wanting to fit in, not, and there's early career, there's a lot of just feeling like you really don't know what you're doing, or you don't know how to, how to even kind of, do your role, let alone be yourself in that role. And, you're not sure, is it welcome? But I think it's this question of, and I think really this, that the outward is a reflection of the inward, like what's happening internally, right? And I think that a lot of people, once they reach a certain kind of internal confidence, then it can be started to demonstrate externally. And I think that's kind of wonderful. Also, women's fashion is really expensive, so there may be some additional, opportunities to express yourself once you, attain a certain, economic status as well.
Yes, 100%. And, we explored that, didn't we? In terms of, it went beyond the kind of the physical kind of appearance in terms of clothes. And it was about just simply sharing personal understanding of, marital status, or, other status symbols, vehicles or houses. And you tapped into something really important there. Is like, is it welcome? And I think that's just a fascinating question. Are there pre-existing perceptions and expectations of women in the workplace? And how do those stereotypes affect how welcome we feel to be authentic in those scenarios? I think that's a huge, huge impact on the reaction that people do get when they kind of try out those new ways of being themselves and see what the reaction is and how that impacts. And I think there's a lot we can do. And so we'll come on to the recommendations from the paper in a bit more detail. But I think there's quite a lot that we can do there, because if we're aware that certain parts of the population and certain individuals or groups are struggling with demonstrating themselves authentically, how can we support them to do that in a more authentic, genuine way that feels safe? And I think a lot of what we're talking about here is about demonstrating psychological safety to advance ourselves in thinking about board diversity across all areas of diversity and inclusion. You know, this is not just gender specific. This is how can we learn from this wonderful group who've had very unique experiences in such senior roles and still incredibly rare. We'll come on to that again as well, to really think about what does this mean for all organizations at leadership development intervention stage, when we're designing and when we're thinking about what we're asking leaders to go through and to learn together and to unite around. What can we do to make sure that there aren't these barriers, even however small and subtle those blockages are? So yes, vulnerabilities. I'm going to move on to thinking about the next part that came up in the conversation was authenticity and voice, and having a voice, using it wisely and authentically. Now, one of the things that stood out from this group that was very common was about having guidance from mentors. So these mentors weren't necessarily other women leaders, but they were mentors who helped them understand when and how to use their voice for the greatest impact. And lots of people don't have those types of mentors. So some people have muddled through, you know, without having that feedback and that opportunity. Have you had any experience of that yourself, Meghan, or do you know women who have been in those circumstances? What is it about having a mentor that's really supported them to be effective?
It's fascinating. Alex, I did a international research study of women who have actually attained senior leadership roles in their family business, which is a whole new another subject. We should do another live stream on this. But one of the things that we found was that these women had really horrible struggles in the beginning of their leadership role as they kind of attained these leadership roles, because they didn't have a mentor. They were experiencing, business challenges, personal challenges, and they weren't able to really see, what their, who their true authentic self was, what is kind of, your right path. And a mentor can shorten that dramatically. And so I'd say that, given that there are so few women in senior leadership roles, there are not as many female mentors. So as you said, Alex, there can be, male mentors as well. But accessing those people who are going to encourage you to be authentic instead of fit in to whatever system you're trying to lead, but so anyway, I think there's a lot more that can be done to advance excellence by basically getting those mentors in a lot earlier.
Yeah, and helping guide the mentor's relationship and input to be of specific value to the stages which we know people struggle with the most, I think is probably quite critical for leadership development interventions. The other piece that was linked to that was also mentors helping develop grit and resilience to deal with the challenge. And, we heard from, I remember one person stood out to me when they said that actually they had the opposite from someone more senior in the organization who basically, said, oh, I don't think you're going to make it. And having that, the grit to face up to someone very influential who's saying, oh, I'm not sure you've got it in you. This is quite a big role for you. Let's see how long it lasts. that negative kind of impact. But having the grit and resilience to be like, oh my goodness, that's just so behind me, and that wasn't important. That was more about them. That kind of pushback is so important. And I think having a mentor at that stage, just to keep you going. We heard that several times. The mentors were the ones that said, no, you can do this. No, you don't doubt yourself. You will do it, and we'll give you the opportunity.
I think you're making a really great point. And I do think resilience and grit is absolutely critical, but it has to come from somewhere. Right? It has to come from, if you are not authentic, you will get burned out and, drag yourself down. If you're not, if you're not living kind of your true self, you can end up with so many issues. And I think that, if people don't have mentors to support them, I think one of the best things to do is to find a peer group who can, of people who are going through similar experiences, similar parts of their career. There's a lot of things out there to just tell you you're not crazy of the things that you're experiencing.
Yeah.
I think it can be it can be really helpful. But I just, on that one comment, I think the end result was that person who this was said to got so mad. She's like, I'm just going to show him. I'm just going to, prove him wrong, which is anger is actually a part of grit as well. It gives you kind of some fortification to say, I'm not going to, allow you to take me down.
Absolutely, and what a successful result that I'm pleased to see at the end of that too. But it does take that question, doesn't it, of how much, how do we help women and anyone else in other minority groups to develop that psychological capital, that strength, that grit, that resilience to deal with those challenging circumstances, to allow them to kind of box it into the, it's not actually that personal, it's more about the individual, to let not internalize it, not let it affect their performance. So there's things that we can do, and there's some recommendations in the white paper that talk about that. One specifically I've used with leaders at this level is really helping them just have some very simple frameworks around what they do share and how they are authentic, because this whole kind of the whole self-authentication piece can be so tricky to navigate, particularly at such a senior level in organizations, in large organizations. You have a very small snapshot of time of which actually to demonstrate who you are with anyone, particularly your employee base, if you have tens of thousands of employees in that organization. How you come across in 30 seconds and what you share and what you say has a huge impact on how people see you and how much they trust you, how much they see integrity. And so actually planning for those moments is critical. So the communications now that people have to make at these levels are so pressurized and stressful. Being able to be prepared for that is critical, and thinking about really the key things that make you who you are. What are your knowledge? What is your knowledge base? Where does that come from? What have you experienced that's developed the knowledge that you uniquely have? What are the skills that you've developed through all kinds of challenges to get you where you are? And what are the strengths that you have that make you different and unique in terms of that combination of knowledge, skills, and strengths? How does your personal purpose fit the organizational purpose? Those things are ways that you can talk very personally, but are the connection to the organization without overloading people too much. So I love that. I think we came on to talking a little bit more about storytelling in a moment, which I think is probably a good one for us to pick up too on that specific point about circumstances. But let's move on. For time's sake, we've spent some considerable time talking about authenticity, and actually in the group that we were in, we spent more time talking about that topic. So it's fairly reflective. I think if we can move on to talking about the next core area of human leadership. So firstly, with authenticity. Secondly, it's inclusion. We've already started to touch on this. It's woven throughout the whole topic of human leadership. But what we were talking about was how could we increase inclusion in boards and organizations, but particularly in male industries. We've kind of added a bit of a lens in there. The thing that struck me the most, and it came out in the report, was my first line around this kind of key area, was that everyone in the room was so comfortable and experienced to talk about inclusion. Mm-hmm. These were women who didn't just advise, but they'd already taken incredible positive action in their organizations. And it was just rolling off the tongue. It was so easy to talk about the tons of things that they'd done to support inclusion. And that was so inspiring. How did you feel in that moment when we were talking about inclusion? Everyone was buzzing. Oh, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this.
No, I think it's, especially, if you're sensitive to having ever not felt included, it's pretty easy to say, I don't want anyone else to go through this. And I think that's the key there. And I think also a lot of the inclusion work, people may have DE&I programs in their boardroom, in their business, where they're really trying to create inclusive environments for their employees. But if it's a hostile environment in your boardroom or the senior management team, that program's not going to be effective. And so, as I was talking earlier about just to be authentic, you actually have to have some vulnerability. To be inclusive, you have to have some vulnerability as well.
Absolutely. Yes, you do. And this is where, a lot of the work that you're doing is so fundamentally important, because it really matters if there's board diversity when these conversations and these initiatives are taking place in organizations, doesn't it?
Yes. And also, I think, a lot of work needs to be, as people start building more inclusive and more diverse boards, it's really critical that they're doing that DE&I work in their boardroom as well. Doing some mentoring, doing some training around how do you create an inclusive environment. And you may find that there are directors who they just can't do it, in which case, you'll have to work on addressing your composition. But I think it's you really, it is the harbinger of the business. And if you're not getting it right in the boardroom, it won't be right anywhere else.
Yeah, and having exactly that, and having the environment that's not too hostile, the welcoming environment to be able to have those conversations is critical. And the piece that I did hear one particular lady say was that when there's pushback and it is difficult, that's when you push harder to have even more conversations about it rather than shrink back. And I thought that was fascinating, because we, as a group, we were talking a lot about elevating in the employee voice and bringing that into the boardroom and bringing that into leadership discussions. And it was very interesting that almost every organization I've ever worked with has an employee voice program. There's some kind of survey, there's some kind of listening, and some organizations are fantastic at it and have awards and are brilliant. But what really struck me about this group that have absolutely been, at the forefront of supporting inclusion in organizations themselves, exactly as you said, based on maybe personal experience, was that they weren't just doing it for employee voice sake to tick the box. They were saying we need to increase employee voice more and more frequently. So an annual survey is just not enough. It needs to be so regular that whenever the individual is ready to share something and feels like it's safe and it's the right timing, they have an opportunity to do so. Not having to wait 6 months for the employee survey, not having to wait for the focus group that's coming around of whether they're going to be in that or not, but having channels that are constantly not just open, but requesting the people's insights and people's feedback and experience. And that's something I think is really changing. And there's an awful lot with tech now. I know some organizations have almost like a daily pop-up question, what's the pulse of the organization today, which sounds so, overwhelming for some organizations that have never done employee feedback or employee voice programs. It's huge to have that kind of thing going on every day. But how fascinating and how insightful for leadership teams and for the board to be able to look at a pulse over time rather than just one snapshot, even in large organizations. Is that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Sorry, I've gone around in circles.
I definitely, I feel very similar, and I think that boards really have a responsibility to oversee culture. And I agree, the annual survey is not going to give you the data you need. And in fact, we have an upcoming session at the Lodis Forum to talk about how do you think about culture in the boardroom and how do you assess it in your organization. And there's so many indicators of a positive culture, right? It's, your diversity of your workforce. It's, pay parity. It's also retention. It's how quickly are you attracting new people? What's your, Glassdoor? And the boards can start looking at, basically a metrics every quarter on the performance of the company. And obviously management teams should be looking at it, daily would be fantastic, or at least, weekly, monthly trends. But I do think there's real data there, and culture is probably one of the company's biggest assets. The positive culture would be a biggest asset or detractor. And certainly in the climate today, being able to attract and retain the proper people and create, value for your customers. The only way to do that is through an effective culture.
Yeah, and there's so many different aspects to that in every organisation, being very different. There's a lot to get through, so I'm going to jump through a couple more pieces here on inclusion and just highlight those. If you haven't yet downloaded the white paper report, this is jam-packed full of all the insights we're talking about here today from the research that we did with this rare group of women in leadership roles. The QR code is on the page. Hopefully you can download the form there directly. If not, I'm sure one of my team can put a link in the comments as well for anyone who can't access through the QR code for some reason. But we talked about authenticity. We've talked about inclusion. Another couple of points that came through on inclusion that were really strong was about starting young with supporting girls, daughters, younger girls all the way through from school age, really to find their voice, to not be shrinking at the back, to be elevating and empowering. And I loved this point that was about encouraging and paving the way for women empowered workplaces. And it wasn't, for me, it was more than just women empowered, it was everyone empowered. It was just empowered workplaces and cultures that really support those leadership pathways. And we know that women in leadership board roles often attract 3 more senior women into those organizations. But what happens when there's not that role model at the top? What can we do? And I'm seeing some questions coming through as well about what can we do. The report is packed full of some recommendations, and I think one of the pieces that came out was that women rising from senior middle management into board level or exec level roles are often expected to, as part of inclusion, to be part of other non-profit boards, which is a fantastic way of learning, isn't it? And also giving back, and is fundamental to what. My concern there is overloading women at a particular point in their career, when actually maybe the one board level role is enough at that point. So in organizations, what can we do? We could try to support women to have more non-profit type non-exec type roles before they take those pieces, so they've already got that understanding, that experience, before they then take on some of those board level responsibilities, so that they're not maxed and overwhelmed. Because my concern is I'm continually seeing women who are leaving at those senior levels before they get to the board level roles. And it's the overwhelm, the concern of having too much, the stress, maybe the glass cliff we've talked about previously. There's some really interesting impacts at that level. Meghan, I don't know if there's anything there that you wanted to talk to.
No, I think one of the biggest issues, I think, is bringing women into the organization at equal rates as men, and really tracking the promotion levels. And I think that's a lot of there is a lot of unconscious bias, and this is not pejorative at all. It just exists amongst middle managers. Middle managers they're looking for certain attributes on teams. They're promoting, and we've seen all the studies on way men and women volunteer for things or think they're qualified for things. And I do think that there's basically only a few people are getting through those funnels. And I think that getting women into senior leadership roles, yes, absolutely, serve on a nonprofit board, but don't stop there. Really look at the other opportunities to get onto other boards. There are private company boards. I know people really want to serve on public company boards. There's a lot of status there, but there's real work to be done in private company boards as well, and they are desperate for basically they're desperate for diversity as well, and they're always looking. So I would say, and focusing on ways to give yourself that resilience and grit. So having those outside experiences and perspectives is excellent. Working with a coach on really helping you to identify where you can bring real value on another board, on nonprofit or otherwise. Finding your mentors wherever you can, joining peer groups. I mean, I think those are all the ways in which anybody can advance themselves in their careers.
Thank you. It's so insightful. And it is, it is important, isn't it, to help people take control of it and accountability for it themselves and feel empowered to do so, as well as removing some of those organizational blockers and ensuring that the organization is absolutely empowering and supporting everybody to take those steps, but taking these things into consideration when they are designing these interventions. We're seeing a lot more leadership development interventions across all organizations coming out of the last couple of years. Through the pandemic, things were really different. And I think things now are changing. People are looking much further into the future. The strategies are developing 3, 5, 10 years in advance, whereas before it was very short term because of the uncertainty. And now because of that, we're seeing leadership programs kind of taking shape to support those strategic initiatives, which often involve transformational change for the organization. And this is the critical time that we need to make sure that diversity is built into absolutely every single component of the design of those programs to ensure that there aren't any blockers that are maybe unseen and hidden from typical kind of design programs.
Can I do one thing on that, Alex? Excuse me. Also, I just want to say that, if you ever hear, anybody who's listening, ever hear the words, there is a pipeline problem, it means you have either defined the role too tightly. So you're only looking for CEOs. Well, guess essentially, 90% of your applicants are going to be white males. We know this, right? That's just who has served in those roles typically. Or if you're looking for somebody with experience versus skill set, that is going to limit your population of who's applying. And so when I do spend time helping boards draft board prospectuses, I really do encourage them to focus on skill sets rather than jobs held, because they are dramatically limiting the pool of candidates if they're only looking at people who are CEOs or whatever else. So.
And we know that, past performance is not the greatest indicator of future performance. Mm-hmm. So, it's about future potential and really being able to unleash people into and empower them into roles that they can absolutely fulfill very successfully with the right level of support too. So coming back to just thinking about role modeling, which was the title actually for this piece, was as how are women in leadership roles at such senior level, how are they role models for human leadership? And role modeling is a key aspect of human leadership. So not just kind of self-management and being able to know who you are and manage yourself well, but how do you demonstrate integrity and trust with others? How do you role model great human leadership in your organizations so that other people really connect with you? And there were some really interesting kind of themes that came from this discussion with the group we were discussing it with. And we talked about following through and living the values. This was a strong one that came out instantly. It was very, very, very fluid. People talking about, again, about vulnerabilities, which we'd already mentioned there, and making sure they were being shared. But there was one specific piece about storytelling. Storytelling, I've heard, multiple times, people doing it really well. But does anyone actually talk about what those people do really well when they are storytelling? And I thought this group nailed it absolutely brilliantly when they said that they did storytelling only when it was appropriate and there was a great opportunity to make a connection with somebody by sharing a story about something that someone else they were talking to was probably experiencing. And so they weren't just simply storytelling to share vulnerabilities about who they were. It wasn't coming from that, I know it sounds awful, but almost like that more of that egotistical kind of line. It was about, actually, I'm sharing a story because I've got a feeling this is something very similar to what you're going through right now. And I think I can help you by sharing some of the experiences, challenges, ways I found forward through that. And it was this almost like this intuitive knowing that they developed then with their audience, however large, it could have been one-to-one or it could have been much bigger, was that actually they absolutely found this one specific kind of golden thread that would make a difference to people. And that really stood out to me. And I'm thinking, well, we can train that in leadership development programs. You can help people find a thread in storytelling, can't you?
Absolutely. And I think, it comes down to, values-based, being authentic, sharing some vulnerability, but only, not to overshare. It's really to that point of trying to lift someone up or help them through. And that I think is, truly what makes a great leader, right? When it's that kind of servant leadership mindset where you're there essentially to make everyone else great or as great as they can be.
Yes,
And
100.
that lifting up is what's so inspiring to others.
Yeah, and that comes on to the other point that was mentioned about visibly supporting leaders who weren't having a great time and who were struggling. So at a senior leadership level, allowing other leaders to struggle and not coping with maybe under-resourcing or reducing priorities, cutting out levels of work if there isn't enough support to actually fulfill those in the strategy, actually reflected really bad as a role model for those senior leaders, allowing that to go on in organizations. And I thought that was really interesting, because I think that's a bigger systemic organizational issue. That's not something necessarily one person could always impact on their own, but it is something at a senior level that you can have a huge impact on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And we see that a lot. The last kind of core area, we had authenticity, inclusion, role modeling, and then human connection. It was about how do you connect with and through others. So not just being good at relationship management, but how do you unite people? How do you network people? How do you connect people to really reap the benefits of great diversity in organizations? How do you do it to enhance innovation and creativity in organizations? How do you actually do that really, really well? And looking to see whether this group of women leaders had found any kind of common themes of how they went about doing that. And the overriding theme was around psychological safety, creating safe space, being the honorable messenger, being the one that will kind of protect a conversation, an issue, a challenge in an organization, and take it to the right people, resolve it perfectly, make sure that people feel safe through that process. It was a strong message, wasn't it? And it really made me think about how do we design interventions that support that more readily, but recognize it.
And I think, there's a difference between being a network and connector and problem solving and it turning into dysfunctional, right? Like you're the only person in the organization that people will really talk to you, tell you the truth. I mean, that becomes, triangulation or whatever else, which can be really dysfunctional to an organization. But I think the key and the true effectiveness is when people are coming to you with a problem and you are by their side as they help resolve it, or you are advocating for them or supporting them. But the whole, don't worry, I'll take care of it, basically put somebody in such a central position or in such a position of triangulation that it becomes really toxic for the organization. So there's a line there to kind of walk.
100%. And how do people actually even get recognized for that as their contribution to actually developing the culture of an organization and supporting inclusive and DE&I initiatives? And is it just unseen, or is it actually incorporated into performance indicators at a senior leadership level? And I'd love to hear from organizations who actually do that really well, to share some of that best practice of how they incorporate in some of the, as I said, those hidden, those unseen kind of conversations and roles that these individuals are taking on simply because of who they are and where they sit in the organization. Exactly as you said, it can become a really difficult influence, and it can change your role, right? So it can change the strategic direction of your career and your role if you are pulled into something like that is completely different time. So it's a fascinating piece. We're rattling through quite a lot here, Meghan, and I realize we've had some questions come through. I've got the team kind of sending through a few pieces for me. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of those and see if we can talk around them. For anyone who hasn't yet downloaded the white paper, it's packed full of the discussion insights from the research that we've done with the Lodis Forum community. And the paper also has a number of recommendations for anyone who's developing leadership development interventions and design. So please do go to the QR code, go to the link that's in the comments, download that form, fill out your details. We want to stay in touch with you. We want to hear, what are you doing? How can we share the best practice? How can we support you to think about human leadership in your own organization that can actually have an impact on inclusivity and diversity at all levels in organizations? So coming through to let's have a look at some of these questions. How can we encourage, just got here, a real barrier to entry is men not having enough senior women mentors. So how can we encourage that more, especially in underrepresented organizations? I think that's a great question. So there are a rare group anyway. So how can we ensure that the mentorship is part of their roles that they're recognized for, in everyone, not just other women in the organization. Any thoughts on that, Meghan?
I mean, I think, yes, I absolutely think that it should be part of somebody's development plan to be, to be mentored and to be a mentor. I think, someone else can be pulling you up as you're pulling them up. And it becomes, I mean, I feel like I have those people in my life, right? Who are, they're 30 years into their career as board chair. They have so much knowledge, but I'm now working with, committee chairs or other newer chairmen who are just have different experiences, and I can help them as I'm being helped. And that is, I think everybody, it doesn't matter what level of organization you're in, can be doing that. And that's, I think, what the real magic of mentorship is.
Yeah, and I think I feel very honoured and lucky to be part of the Lodis Forum and have that availability available to me. But it is a challenge and a struggle, and with people being more socially and morally conscious now, actually people want to pay it forward and to be able to support others in that way, and encouraging that and supporting it as much as possible. Time is the hardest thing, right? So carving out that time for people, giving them the time, creating it, is really, really critical. There's another great question here. What top 3 things do you suggest for women employees to do to grow to C-level and board level positions? So, we know that lots of women are leaving organizations or not choosing to progress into exec and board level roles and C-suite roles. What would you suggest, Meghan, that what are the top 3 things that they could do that would help them grow into and feel more positive about growing into those roles and not kind of be too nervous about it?
I mean, honestly, say yes. If there's, not like, not too much, but, somebody gives you an amazing business opportunity and it requires, maybe some sacrifice or relocation or whatever it is, really, really, really try to say yes to, and make an effort to dig deep. That would be one. The second one is do not, and we know this, but do not basically ever say, I don't think I'm qualified. If you hear that voice in your head, talk to your mentor, talk to the person who's, offering, has the roll up and say, my concern is, or I'm thinking that, but here's what I have to the table. Would I be considered? And, digging deep, I think is one of the best ways that you could actually, find yourself. And then lastly, I would say just continue your personal development. It's fun when you invest in yourself. It's fun when you help others to invest in themselves as well. But lastly, I just don't do it alone. It's way too hard. Find those peer groups, find those opportunities to connect with other people who are on similar journeys. There's a lot of organizations out there to help people be better, better versions of themselves. And that's what I think you'll find. And one of the things I found from the Lodis Forum, we started this over the pandemic when nothing was fun, but it helped me. I was going through such a challenging time in the business and the boardroom. And it turned out that it lifted me up in a way that I don't know that I could have, done myself. Mm-hmm. And it was me helping others and then others helping me. And it became this kind of magic, happy place.
I agree. It was certainly a magic, happy place for me, and still is, Meghan. And I'm very grateful for your continued motivation to keep that going. And it's so professional and such a great community to be part of. If anyone hasn't heard of it already, do go and check out the website or get in touch with Meghan directly. I think there's quite a lot coming through here about servant leadership, and I think that's really interesting because that's certainly from my perspective. There's a theme here around almost like the duty to others that is a stronger pull. And I feel certainly when I look at my teenage daughters who are, all over social media and they're scared to say something or put something out there or a photograph of themselves for fear of judgment from others.
Mm-hmm.
And I constantly say to them, like, you shouldn't care so much about what other people think, because actually that can get in the way. It's almost like that damaging aspect of thinking, oh no, not necessarily imposter syndrome, but maybe I'm not good enough for this. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this for some reason. And actually, I've had to overcome that. And I think that's something that I would say, to people moving into senior leadership roles. You have, a greater exposure at a senior leadership level. And that does mean that you are open to more judgment. And so therefore, if you've lived in that environment, you know that there are going to be people that do, have a voice around things, and it can be negative and it can eat away at you, no matter how strong you are and how much grit you have. For me, the way I got around that was almost just really thinking about the duty to those people out there who are struggling more with that, and actually the benefits to those people to see you out there doing it anyway, despite knowing that, yes, people might judge you negatively or they might say something bad about you, but doing it anyway because there's more people out there that need that role model for me was just fundamentally critical. And that kind of switched. It's almost like when people say, well, maybe, you don't care so much about what you think in a public environment. Believe me, I do. I have the same emotions. I'm just very willing to say, actually, it's more important for the future of workplaces that people can see women out there in senior leadership positions talking about some of these difficult topics and being transparent. So that kind of pull balance is what works for me. And I hope maybe sharing that might create some insights for others too. We're at 45 minutes already. It's been a fascinating, jam-packed conversation, and I really appreciate your time, Meghan, and everyone who's joined us today. If you haven't yet downloaded the white paper, it's full of recommendations. I think there's almost like 15 different recommendations here that came from the insights and themes with this fantastic community of how we can really think about supporting leaders, all leaders, in future leadership development interventions in all types of organizations, to really grow our approach to human leadership in impacting, humanizing the world of work, which is ultimately our vision at Bailey & French, and something that's very personal purpose to me. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments, your ideas, your insights, your best practice. We've got a ton of fantastic comments here and some great questions. Really appreciated everyone's engagement. I hope everyone who's listening in afterwards to the recording and maybe to the audio version has enjoyed listening in. I hope you can listen to the rest of our Humanizing Work series. There's a whole load on our Spotify channel around human leadership as well as team flow. So do check that out. Have a look at our YouTube channel as well. We've got lots of videos on there. And sign up to the Bailey & French LinkedIn page, where you get all the latest offers and insights to all of our work around human leadership across the world. We have more questions coming in. Where do we get the white paper? There should be a QR code for those LinkedIn users on the top of the screen. I think the team has posted the link to the white paper in the comments. I'm sure they'll be able to do that again now, so that people can access it if they've only just joined. But for now, I will say thank you so much to Meghan. A truly inspirational person. So yes, she set up the Lodis Forum at a difficult time, and it really had an impact on me and my life at that point in time as well. Really thinking about the future of my organisation and being part of that community, sharing and learning was truly inspirational. Meghan, what you've done is really important already, and there's so much more opportunity to take that to the next level. This opportunity is big. So if you're interested in the Lodis Forum, absolutely.com. I will be sharing more information about all of our work on human leadership through my page and our Bailey & French page too. If you have any questions or thoughts, you want to get in touch with us, we'd love to hear from you. So please do that. Meghan, thank you. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. I hope you've enjoyed the time and it's whizzed by for you too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alex. And thank you for putting together the white paper. It's been a valuable resource, and even our group who was participating in the conversation has found a great value out of seeing it all kind of, pulled together in what you did. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And hopefully there's more to come. So thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to close up now. Please do share the link to the recording with everyone. We're quite open with our content, and please do share the white paper. Get in touch with me directly or any of my team. We'd love to continue talking. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day wherever you are.